So there are two types of planning we're going to talk about today. The one is a more structured process. And then we're going to talk about some unstructured planning. So structured process, you start with the vision. What's your primary motivation? What is your future hope? And that kind of drives what you're going to do. And then after that, you start to look at, okay, so if that's my future hope, to what end do I want to plan? What are my goals to get there? Usually there's a single vision, and you want kind of a single vision, and I'll explain ARUPs in a minute, and a couple of others that I think singularly identify your vision, and then you figure out what is it you want to achieve. And then you have objectives. These are the things we're going to do. Now, all of these words, goals, objectives, and the next two are really things that help you achieve the vision, and whether you want to call them goals or objectives or here's our plan or whatever else you want to call them, it's a process of getting there. And these objectives should be SMART. Does anybody know what that is? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Don't say, I'm going to be Michael Jordan and make $200 million, unless you really think you're that good. Tactics are how we're going to implement it, and then tasks are what do you do today? I had a situation where in a small town in Arizona, I was asked to build an ambulatory care building. We were going to have a little x-ray, a little room for procedures, but we had to use the local plumber and the local electrician, and I was living here in Salt Lake. And so we sat down and went through this process. And I said to him, look, don't worry about any of this stuff. If you will do what I ask you to do in the next 2 weeks, we're just going to be okay. Because they were getting all hung up with this part. So if you can plan this to that point, and then you can say, okay, all I have to do is this piece. And if everybody does their piece when they're supposed to do it, sooner or later the building's going to be built and everything's going to be fine. So let me give you this example. Now, we can't use Blaine because he's married, but some of the other you may want to have some kind of a marriage or relationship. So this is for me. I will be the happiest married person in the world. That's my vision. Okay? My goal is I will get married and do what she says. And I have lived for 40 years with the mantra, happy wife, happy life, and it's worked out okay. The objective then is I'm going to find someone to marry this year. Now, some of you might think that's silly, but my son came to me once. He was 28, and he said, okay, Dad, I'm done. I'm going to find somebody to marry. But in the meantime, I'm going back downstairs to play video games. So we had to have a little discussion about what that means. But the tactic then, I'll decide what's important in the partner. I'll date once a week, assess each date, and cope with rejection. The task then is, I will call Jim or Sally, Bob or Betty. I will meet new people by going to clubs or church or camping or football game. What I tried to instill in my son was, if you don't ever meet someone new, you won't ever get married this year. Because he never went out, he never went on dates, he never associated with anybody. He would go to school, he would go to work, he would come home, he would do his homework, he would play video games, he would go to bed. So I forced him to do this stuff. Now, the last thing you want is your dad to be forcing you to date. But that's kind of what we had to do. So let me show you how this works with ARUP. This might be a better example. ARUP has a vision to be the laboratory of choice. So if you go into any city in the United States and you do a survey of the hospitals and you say, what is the best laboratory in the world? We want them all to say ARUP. That's our vision. Now, there's a whole bunch of things to do to get there, but that's our vision. We have a mission statement to improve patient care and to support the University of Utah, and that's kind of who we are. But our vision is to be the laboratory of choice in America. So, how do we do that? Well, one of our goals is let's provide services that help our clients. ARUP, our clients are hospitals. We contract with hospitals. We don't contract with doctors. We contract with hospitals. Now, it's changing a little bit for those of you in genetics, but for the most part, our clients are about 1,000 hospitals that send us work. So, we want to provide whatever services to help them happy because we know if it helps them, then they'll pick us. You see how those two are related? We know if they like us, they'll pick us. So, why don't we help the doctors build the relationships, or help the hospital build relationship with doctors? Now, let me tell you how this works. The doctors in a community send the lab work to the hospital, and then the hospital sends us the lab work that they can't do. So, short of helping the hospital get more inpatients, what we do is we go out and help them build a referral system amongst all the doctors in their city. And then the doctors send the lab work to the hospital, then the hospital's volume grows, and then they send us more work. Okay? So, if we can help them build a relationship with their doctors, then they grow. Then they think, then we're providing better service for them, and then they will choose us. So we created a joint marketing campaign where we went out to hospitals and said, look, there are all these doctors in your neighborhood. They're not using you. Why don't we give them a brochure that has your logo on the back and our logo on the back, and let's send out some of our medical directors to teach them about how to test for Lyme disease or other kind of tick-borne diseases. And then they'll be happy because you're helping them. Then they'll send you the work, and then you'll send us the work. And so we've created a process, and we have 6 different service lines, so to speak, or groupings of tests. You know, we do 11 tests related to tick-borne diseases. Lyme disease obviously is the biggest, but there are 10 more diseases you can get from ticks. So if we look at hospitals and we see the hospitals that are only sending us the Lyme disease tests, we know that they have to be doing the other 10 because those ticks are giving you all sorts of diseases. Anybody had a tick, by the way? It's not fun. And that whole idea where you strike a match and then poke it on it, that actually works. The tick does back out. Just a little outdoorsy talk here. So, if you try and pull those ticks out by themselves, the top's going to stay in. And then you got to use a knife. And that was far worse on me than the fire. So anyway, you can see how when you're planning, there's this process. Where do we want to be? What's our vision? And then how do we get there? So we say to the marketing department, look, all you need to do is this. And if you do this, then let us do the rest. Okay? So, planning is necessary. It saves resources. It helps you use your resources wisely. We also at ARUP use an unstructured process, and so do you. Every day we use this. And it's basically, what do you see? What do you think will happen? How will it impact you? And what should you do about it? And let me take you through this process. Open enrollment for the Affordable Care Act. Does anybody know how many new people in America were insured? Depends on who you talk to, and it kind of depends on your political persuasion. But the general number is about 16 million people who didn't have insurance before the Affordable Care Act now have insurance. That's a good thing, right? So, what do we think is going to happen with those 16 million people who didn't have insurance? What's going to happen to them with their health care? They can now see doctors, right? So, if they see doctors, then how do you think ARP is going to be impacted? More tests. 16 million more people are going to have tests done. So that's going to really, really help ARUP. So what should we do about it? Should hire more people, build more buildings, put in more equipment, That's 16 million people. That's a huge percentage of the population that now has insurance that didn't before. So we started this process. And then, guess what? There's no money. They're not going to reimburse for those tests at an amount that will allow us to actually make any money. So now we go through this cycle, but there's no money. So should we build? Should we hire new people? Are the tests really going to come? So those are the kinds of things. And I read magazines and articles every day, and I have a researcher who goes on the web, and we look at the National Institutes for Health, and we look at all our competitors and the American Hospital Association, and we're trying to find trends. What has happened? What do we think is going to happen? Is it going to impact us, and what should we do about it? And that's what you do every morning when you get up. You look outside. Pretty soon it's going to rain. You're going to dress differently. Pretty soon you're going to have, you know, we all plan really quickly in this format. Okay, let's go to the second set. Remember, planning was first, and now we're in decision making. What do you need to have in order to make a good in order to make any decision? You have to be informed to make a good one, but to make any kind of decision, you have to have options, right? I mean, you're deciding between A and B. You're deciding between good and better, and sometimes decisions are really, it's not good or bad. You know, you chose this field. I know a person who works at ARUP who actually was accepted to medical school the same time she was accepted into med tech school. She had to make a choice. She chose med tech school and never looked back and is deliriously happy in what she's doing. So you define the problem, you analyze it, and then you choose. Now we won't talk about the decision to find the woman that you married and how you did that, but we all go through these decisions all the time. What's a career? What should I wear? Who should I go on a date with? All of those kinds of decisions we analyze and we choose. So let's go back to this. Remember our slide here? This is manager decision making. When all of you become managers, you're going to have to sit and figure out where you fit along this line. So let's talk about these decision makers. So you all know what an autocratic decision maker is, right? That's somebody who just their way or the highway. They know exactly what they're doing. The good news is that work gets done. There's usually clear expectations. You're usually focused. And sometimes you want somebody to be that. You know, how many of you have been in classes where you're broken up into little groups and you have to do a study group and you have to do projects? Do you guys have to do any of that? When I was in graduate school, I hated that because I was just trying to get through school to get a job. And I didn't have any emotional attachment to the project we were doing. So I wanted someone to be autocratic. Now, the bad news is that there's little opportunity for input. There's usually low satisfaction. There's high absenteeism, and these are all national studies, but it's hard to work with somebody who's autocratic all the time. So how do you work with them? You understand what their motives are. You don't take it personally. You build credibility. You just be the best worker that you can. You can always learn something from an autocrat. And sometimes, even if you're not, you may have to be one. Sometimes you're the man or you're the woman and you've got to make the decision. And you've got to be in charge. Now, like I said, I haven't figured out how to get my wife to do that about dinner at night, but we're getting there. Okay, now you're in the middle. It's more of a democratic process. Decisions are made slowly. You have to vote. ARUP is a very democratic company. We sit in our meetings on Tuesday. We have a 2-hour executive meeting where we look at statistics and try and figure out how to plan for the future of the company. And sometimes we'll take votes on things and it'll be 10-1. And our CEO will say, well, let's think about it for another week. And I'll think, no, it's 10-1. The 10 guys win. And usually next week, we've thought about it, we've talked about it, and a lot of times different choices are made because of the democratic process. Now, it's pretty hard in a democratic process to decide what to do if you're in a movie theater and there's fire or smoke. You don't want to say, hey, let's take a vote about what we do. So it's pretty hard in crisis situations to have a democratic process. Again, you can learn from it. It's a great chance to grow. Now, let's look at the laissez-faire. This is somebody who it's a manager who says, look, I don't care. You guys do what you want. We got this project, so go ahead. I don't have any interest in being involved, so figure out what to do. Usually, we have IT programmers who work really well here because you tell them they have to program, and you don't have to give them much other structure because they'll just program. And so this works really well in some of those categories. Workers who are not self-starters, workers who need the direct attention have a more difficult problem with this. And again, you can learn from that. And sometimes you see managers who are really good at each of these, who actually can be autocratic when they need to. Now, I did this up in a conference in Jackson Hole a few months ago, and Jackson, Wyoming, and asked them, and somebody in about the second row said, I'm not autocratic. And the two people to the side of her started laughing because they work with her. And they said, you're the worst. And she said, I am not. And so we started talking about it. And she realized that when she was at work, she was in a laboratory. You have SOPs, you have policies and procedures, you have to be autocratic, you have compliance, you have safety, you have to live with all of those rules. And so you will do it my way because we have to live by the rules. But she realized when she went home, she was a completely out of control wife and mother because she didn't care what anybody did. And it was interesting to talk to the other two people and have them say, yeah, she's really autocratic at work. Yeah. But you know what? We go hiking on the weekends and she doesn't care where we go. She doesn't care what we do. But when she comes to work, she turns that on. So I'm not saying one is good or one is bad. It's just kind of give some thought and realize to where you are on this scale. Okay, there's something that's called restrictive behavior, and we're going to talk about some of that today, to making decisions. The first one is anchoring. And anchoring happens when I say to you, you know what? It's kind of your decision on what color we want to paint the house, but you know, I really like green. But it's up to you. It's your choice. So I've anchored her in green. And you know what? We all do it all the time because we try to anchor, because we think that's good. But that destroys the idea of her saying, gee, I really like red or pink or blue or whatever. You know, we can paint the house, but we've always had the same color. The status quo says we need to do our testing this way. We've already spent $20,000 on this project, and so we're not giving up on the project. And this is an argument we have a lot where, and I'll give you an example. We bought handhelds. You know, we pick up tests from hospitals all over the United States. And we use these handhelds, and we thought it was a great idea at the time for the couriers, because they could just scan the sample and then we'd know what was there. And we thought it was a great idea. But when we bought them, the technology got so much better because of the smartphones. So why don't the couriers just go in and take the smartphones and go click, click on the sample, and then immediately when we understand what it is. So why do we need this other process that has these big handheld scanners? Wasn't anything anybody did that was wrong. It was just that technology went by us so fast. So we stopped and said, okay, there's a new technology, so we're not spending any more money on these handhelds because there's something else coming. Where we could have said, oh no, we've already spent a lot of money, we've already bought these, we're going to keep going with these no matter what. So, sunk costs. Confirming evidence. I really want to paint the house, but you know, I've done some research and blue makes our children calmer. And so I've done my research and the sample that I have says that we should do this as opposed to other things. Again, these aren't in and of themselves bad. They're just restrictive behavior on making decisions. Framing the discussion. Let's figure out where we want to move after college, but I refuse to move east of the Mississippi River, and I don't want to go to California. You see, I'm framing now. Let's really be creative and have decisions, but we're not going to have real decisions. My wife and I did that as I was finishing graduate school, and her frame was, we're staying in Utah. And when I came home and said I'd accepted a job in Southern California, I almost went by myself because one of us had framed and one of us had not. Now, you can see that we came back, so, you know, happy wife, happy life. Overconfidence, let's make a decision, but I know I'm right and this is what we're going to do. Or recallability is when you say, we need to make this decision, but I remember in the old days we had a similar decision and this is what we made. So when you're making decisions as management or as a manager, you have to be really careful about the restrictive behavior. Now, there are 1,000 ways to look at decision making. All of these things here, if you've taken any statistics class or you've heard about any of this stuff, all of these are different ways that will help you make decisions. This is the why diagram. The house is dirty. Why? Well, it could be the kids or the pets, which is really interesting because usually it's the adults that mess the house up, but that's not part of this. So why is that? Well, too many toys. Well, why is that? They got new toys so you go through that process. This is the fish diagram that everybody's kind of familiar with. You split up the idea between people, method, environment, and materials, and then you try and figure out what the issues are. This is a typical flow chart that I have no idea what it's for. I probably should see this before next year. But you can see how yes or no's. If this is true, then we go here. If that's true, then we go here. And you've all probably done this, but they're all methods to help you decide something. What is the best choice for us? This is an input, process, output. At ARUP, we sample, we take samples, and we test for them. The inputs, suppliers, reagents, companies. You know that all of our hospitals in the United States, after September 11th of 2001, they shut down the airplanes for 4 days. No airplane flew. We'd never thought of that as a company. Why would we have ever thought that the airplanes in the United States would be grounded for 4 days? So now we have, by the way, a plan, and I've got a book in my office that says if the airplanes go down again, this is how we will get every sample from ARUP to us. And this is the process that we go through. But in the meantime, all of this is input, and then what's the output? How do we get the tests? How do we get the sample results back to the hospitals? Again, it's a way to look at decision making. So decision making requires alternatives. And there are lots of different ways to figure out the best way. Okay. The third is organizing. Think about the place where you work right now and think about how well that place has to be organized in order for you to work there. And when you start looking at organization, you start to look at coordination of things, communication, create tasks, how to do things, how to get things flowing smoothly. We've talked about laboratorians where we have standard operating procedures, standard procedures for doing tests, and that comes to the people, the programs that need to be done, in our case testing, and the place where the work has to be done. The place where we test and how we test is very, very specific in a laboratory. And wherever you go after graduation, or if you stay with the ARUP, You'll know that if you go in and you're a microbiologist, you do certain things a certain way. But everything else is going to be different in those organizations. So you're moving forward. Here's some general thoughts about laboratory organization, but it works. Remember when I read the little statement about managers? Managers make things so they're consistent and they work cleanly. So every 2 weeks when we get paid at ARUP, nobody seems to worry about it because there's a process. There's a process for punching in. There's a process even down to when the guy who shovels the parking lot comes to shovel. He knows he's going to get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from the night manager if there's more than an inch, and he shovels before the day people come. So there's a process, and when you start looking at the process, you start to see that all of these elements are part of organization. Operational, staffing, making sure that the lights are on. I remember once sitting in a meeting where we just decided to buy a big piece of equipment, and we bought it and had no idea that it required power that we didn't have. So we changed that process. So whenever you get a piece of equipment approved, facilities has to say, well, this is kind of the power that comes. So when you think about organization, you can think that it really is detailed. And sometimes organizations just work by themselves. They're not organized a single bit. And sometimes things change. Anybody been in a company ever that got sold? How was that?
Horrible.
Yeah. So did you make a lot of money? Were you part of the seller, or were you the person who no longer was there?
Definitely one of the no longer there.
Yeah, sorry to hear that. I've done that too. Yeah, see, okay, there you go. Sometimes organizations change, and there's not much you can do about it. You just do your best with where you're going. But organization is the management function of getting things ready so you can then do the work. Implementation is the last one, and then we'll get to a couple of other things. So implementation is actually doing your jobs. So you show up to work, and right there, everything is there. Organization, decision-making, planning, all tries to get everything right there for you so you can show up and do your work. Or if you're a manager, so you show up so that people can come and get the work done. It's very, very complicated unless you're running your own business and there's only 2 or 3 employees, which still you have to abide by certain laws and struggle through that. So you're controlling, you're monitoring, you're trying to do personal development and those kinds of issues. So let's then talk about real quickly about process improvement. Every year that I've taught this class, and I've taught this class since 2003, every year, whether it's Dr. Wilkins or it was Larry Schiff before that, we'd have these emails that would say, did that go okay? And or what could I have done different? Or how could it be handled different? Or how can we improve the process? And every year, and now you've probably seen it this year, there are probably some things that Dr. Wilkins has done different this year than last year because there's a constant effort to improve. And I guess this year there's a lot more electronics that's being used for that. But we are always trying to improve our processes. And this really came out of a guy, you're all way too young, but if you ask your parents, the worst thing you could have done when I was a teenager was purchase something that was made in Japan. It was the biggest piece of junk. It never fit. If you bought a bicycle that was made in Japan, you had to put the pieces together. You never had enough. It was awful. And then in the 50s, they had a guy named Edward Deming who went to Japan to help them. And he took them through process improvement modalities. And over the course of probably only about 30 years, it got to the point where Japanese products made in Japan were exceptionally well done. In fact, even today, if I buy a box and bring it home, I'm fascinated that everything fits together and that there are enough parts. And that's all because of this constant process improvement. We're going to talk just about a couple of them today. But it's the process of identifying a problem and figuring out how to fix it so it doesn't happen again. Pretty simple. If you give some thought to it, some of you probably have, and we all have problems where we know it's been the same problem for years. Why does that still happen that way? And it's because people aren't willing to sit down and figure out how to fix it. Because it's hard. It's hard to fix problems because of everything we talked about. Oh, we've always done it that way. That's always an issue for us. So, problems start. Now let's look at healthcare. Okay? You're all in that business. So what's the problem identification? Why did they start talking about the Affordable Care Act?
There's a ton of people that's not insured.
Ton of people uninsured. Does anybody know how many? 47 million people are uninsured. That's a lot of people who have no access to health care. And we're the greatest country in the world. So we should do something. So that was the problem. How do we know it's a problem? Because of two things. First of all, these folks are not getting the health care they need. And we're the greatest country in the world. We ought to take care of them. But second of all, when they do need help, they run to the emergency room and they get way too much care. And then the hospital that owns the emergency room doesn't get paid. And so they jack up all of our prices because we have to pay for all of the uninsured people. Now, I'm being really simplistic about this. But that was the problem as it was seen. Okay? And almost everybody in America at the time, in 2008 and 2009, agreed that that was a problem. Here's where, okay, there are 5 steps, and at step number 2 was where the whole country fell apart. And that was analyzing the problem. How do you find out? Why are those 47 million people uninsured? Well, 20 million of them, 15 million of them had money. They just chose to, what they said was they would rather buy a BMW than buy health insurance. And I'm sure it wasn't that simplistic. But in analyzing the problem, it became very, very difficult to clarify and agree on the problem definition, and no one ever did. We knew 47 million people were uninsured, but politically, it was a whole different issue to analyze what that means. So, should we give insurance to somebody who chooses not to have it? Should we make everybody have it? Should we not make everybody have it? The third thing was, how will we know if we've solved the problem? So how do you know if you'll solve the problem? Well, we have 16 million people with insurance now, right? So we solved it. There's still 31 million out there, aren't there? So when the Affordable Care Act was put together, they said out of the 47 million, we're pretty sure we can insure 30 million. We think the Affordable Care Act will insure 30 million. So the other 17 million, 6 million are in prison. They have their own health insurance program. The other 11 million are the folks that are in the country illegally. And politically, they didn't think we could take care of those folks. Okay? And there's a whole bunch of issues there. But that was, nobody really could understand the problem. So what are the alternatives? And here's where it got kind of dicey politically, because one political group had the president and the Congress and the Senate. So at that time, and I'm not again, I'm not being political, I'm just telling you what happened. They basically said, we've decided what the alternatives are. And what we're starting to see now is the solution feedback. If some of this doesn't work, let's try and fix it. Other people are saying it doesn't ever work, and some people are saying, yeah, but there's 16 million people who have insurance. And so this problem-solving process kind of broke down politically because people weren't kind of working through it. But if you work through this process, you can resolve almost anything. So, final note, process improvement has become a very, very technical area. And I'm just going to talk about three. And again, there are hundreds of these, and I'm not an expert in these. We talked a little bit about Six Sigma, and what that means is if you're building widgets, or you're building ball bearings, or you're building toy cars, or you're building Corvettes, then you're going to have a certain range where it's going to be okay if the car's a little off or if it's not very, we can't have every car exact the same, so they fluctuate a little bit from the mean. And we think that a normal range, the theory is a normal range is about 3 standard deviations away from the mean. And a standard deviation is kind of just a technical jargon to say if your mean's 100, then this might be 12. So you go from 88 to 112. So you're okay if you're in between that category. If you go outside of this category, then you've got a problem. So if you hit 3 sigma, then that's where I said that you can have 3 errors per million. So if you have 3 errors per million, then you're sitting in between here. If you have 20, then your bell curve has moved out and you need to figure out processes to bring it back in place. Does anybody know what industry has better than Six Sigma?
I would say microprocessor.
Okay. Microprocessing construction, because they've been able to create the model, repeat the model, and everything that comes in is exactly the same. That's probably a good example. Airplanes. Airplanes, even with the few disasters that we've had recently, airplanes are still the safest mode of transportation. Now, every time I hear that, and for all the years I traveled, I think, yeah, but you can, like our friend up here who got in a little crash today, you don't usually get in little crashes in airplanes. But still, for the millions and millions and millions of miles that are traveled, the death rate for airplanes is almost 0. So, Six Sigma. And the way you fix that is you define the problem, you define the process, then you measure, then you analyze, then you improve, then you control. So you're constantly getting better. You constantly learn how to do it better and better. The second one is lean. Now, lean doesn't stand for anything, but what they've identified in this lean process, and you see it a lot now, is we just want to constantly improve. So, what brings value to our clients, to our customers, and then what's the process to take that to the customer? And then how can we get those pieces to interact to the point where we make no mistakes at all so that the customer gets exactly what the customer wants? And that's really the lean cycle and how organizations practice lean manufacturing that Toyota always says. We have lean manufacturing. And that's because they're constantly trying to improve. And then the final is what's called the Shewhart cycle or the Plan, Do, Check, Act. And we do this all the time. You're planning, you're putting things together, then you do it, then you see if you had the right outcome, and then you change as you go. So these are 3 examples that you'll see. You'll see a bunch more in the book as you go along and learn other things. There are all sorts of different aspects of process improvement because we want to just get better all of the time. Less waste, better product for the customer, and part of management's talents and responsibilities are to improve ourselves, improve our organizations. So, in closing, it's the art of organizational and individual success is what any company wants. Any laboratory, we want every employee at ARUP to do his or her very, very best. We want every test to be perfect. We want grandma in a hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma to be sure that if her sample comes to ARUP, that she's going to be taken care of. And at the same time, we want every single employee at ARUP to wake up in the morning and say, yippee, I get to work at ARUP today. Now, doesn't always happen. Maybe it doesn't happen most of the time. But we want to create, and management's process and management's goal is to create a process where the customer is deliriously happy and your employees are deliriously happy. So that's it. Any questions or anything I can answer?